Well, hi there, and welcome to today's session where we're taking a look at how to rectify a defective SMSF document. My name's Dunn, CEO of Smarter SMSF, and it is a practical webinar today to take you through how you can utilize the Smarter SMSF platform where you come across a situation through the document trail and you find out that there is something amiss. So whether there is an incorrect trustee, there's some form of information around an incorrect name, an incorrect date, missing name, missing dates, or procedural things that haven't been followed that ultimately prejudice the status of the current deed and the actions that would want to happen from that deed. So today's session, I'm going to take you through some of those technical aspects, but most importantly, how you can apply that in the deed of rectification process that we have as part of our Smarter Legal Review. So let's get stuck into today's agenda. So we're going to spend a little bit of time initially talking to you about the importance of getting this right. So the impact of defective documents, how they can arise, and ultimately some of the case law that we continue to see in this area. We'll then talk about the role that rectification plays and some of the examples again that we see around that area. And from there, we will then really move into the approach that you can take through the Smarter SMSF platform to utilize the Smarter Legal Review. So we'll help you to understand how we have built this so that you can look at applying it to circumstances that you may have with your clients and utilizing the Hill Legal Service, who is our legal partner as part of the Smarter SMSF platform more broadly. We'll look at the process for rectification. So I'm going to take you through step by step on the platform how you can find the deed of rectification order form, and B, how you go through that entire ordering approach, including then what happens upon submission of that particular order as well. We'll then talk about the levels of review that are available, in particular, the deed of rectification process in isolation. And then we'll finish off with some key takeaways for you from today's session. So this area of defective documents is becoming more and more significant in the SMSF space, as we have over a long period of time now seen SMSFs go through from somewhat the 80s, to me, certainly from the 90s, where we've seen those funds get established. We've seen changes potentially from individual trustees to corporate trustees. We've seen major reforms where we've needed to get updates, whether it be in 2007, maybe 2010 with the LRBAs, then in 2017, and a whole range of other reasons why variations may have occurred. And throughout that process, we may end up in a position where there is some form of error that has occurred. And we're going to talk about those errors, but ultimately where those errors do occur, we end up in a situation where it will prejudice the outcomes of what may or may not, what may you want to have occur in respect to that fund. And we've seen this in a number of cases, as I've said. The Naruman case was one that goes back in 2018 around the Queensland Supreme Court, and a decision was made in the courts around whether the what deed ultimately was operative and how the court would approach certain decisions, including the fact that we had multiple deeds in play and there was a break in the chain as part of that particular process. And they looked to remedy that situation as part of fixing the chain so that decisions could be made based upon what was presumed to be the operative deed, which was around the 6th or 7th deed at that point in time. And that becomes really important because we need to ensure that we have absolute confidence that the deed that we are working with when we're preparing binding death benefit nominations, when we're thinking about who are the naturally correctly appointed trustees, and there was a case of Alisil in Victoria only in the past couple of years that questioned that decision around, who was correctly appointed as a trustee where a change has occurred. All these things come down to the chain of documents that are available and whether they have been done correctly for the SMSF. Because the courts, as I state here in this final bullet point, before they do anything, before they consider the facts of the case, they will meticulously review the chain of SMSF documents. And why do they do this? They do this for the sole reason to ensure that the decisions that they're going to be making are done with what is the actual operative deed. So if we have a defect in the chain at some point in time and that defect hasn't been remedied, then in many instances, those subsequent amendments that have been made are effectively ignored by the courts, and they would go back to the deed that is the last deed that they see as operative. And therefore, it does put at risk many of the other things that may have been done subsequent to that date. So the idea here of rectification is to ultimately fix those errors that you find along the way. They can be quite simple in respect to identifying parties that may have an incorrect name, as I said, the fact that documents may not have been signed or dated correctly, or more importantly, that we see around procedure. Have they actually followed the right steps in the previous deeds? And therefore, how can we actually fix that overall process? So the role of rectification here becomes quite important because it is about curing what is defective. And noting that as part of this process, it is all about making sure that this is what those individuals intended to do at the time of executing that document. And but for the mistake that occurred in respect to those previous documents, the intention of what they actually wanted is not reflected in the particular documents that they have in place. So ultimately, the deed of rectification is there to serve a purpose, and that purpose is to amend ultimately what was incorrect and what was understood to have been correct in the first instance, and confirm ultimately to a true agreement the intention of what the parties initially wanted. So under the common law of doctrine of rectification, ultimately we're looking at these three key elements. One, we're looking at intention. So the parties held a common intention which continued until such a time that the document was executed. We recognize then that there was a mistake and that ultimately the document at this point in time does not accord with the parties' common intention of what it was meant to do in the first instance. And therefore, off the back of that, we have rectification that is going to occur that will actually correct the mistake that is in that previous document or documents. And the result is that the words of the document are ultimately amended to reflect the true intention of what the parties actually wanted to have occur. Okay, and I'm going to now talk through some of those different errors that we might have, but it is important to understand those three key elements. So what was intended to occur originally, we recognize there's a mistake, and the fact that we're looking to rectify will actually then correct the mistake. So as I said at the very beginning, we see these kind of innocent and innocuous defects that occur when it comes to document production with our SMSF clients. Whilst it doesn't seem that significant, or it seems somewhat trivial, ultimately, the impact of that defective document can become very significant. So these are some of the areas that we see quite regularly that we need to then look to remedy through a deed of rectification or sometimes ratification process. So typographical errors are very common. So typically what we see here is this will occur due to, say, incorrect spelling of a name. It could be errors in the descriptions of the parties, such as who are the trustees or who are the members. We also seen them in respect to an incorrect naming convention around the fund, in accordance with what the original deed stated, and a disparity between what is also against the ATO records. and it could also relate to the dating of particular documents. And again, going back through a sequence of upgrades and changes. When we've seen examples, we might have seen maybe a missing date through that upgrade process. So there may have been an additional deed upgrade that has been missed, or a date, an incorrect date has been included there. And therefore, again, we don't have a proper sequence of events that have occurred that reflect the overall history of the fund. Now, in these typographical errors that occur, such defects here can be easily cured. And that's the most important part here, by employing that doctrine of rectification that I was talking to before. And ultimately, we prepare what is known as a deed of rectification that will look to remedy those particular errors. Now, the other aspect that we see quite common is around following procedure in respect to that fund. Okay, so this is arguably the more significant area, because where the governing rules of the fund, where we're making subsequent changes, aren't followed, it is that element that provides the greatest risk to our clients. So, for example, if we have a trust deed that may be amended or updated, but it may be conditional upon the consent of, say, an employer sponsor, it could be a participating employer, it could be a founder, could also be a guardian in some instances. And in all of those, we've gone through and actually done the upgrade, and it may have been approved by the trustees, but we have failed to incorporate the other parties that were critical to the approval of any upgrade actually occurring. So we need to, again, look to remedy the procedural misstep that has actually occurred in that instance. So also it should be noted that some trust deeds are also provided for, or provide for, deed upgrades by trustee minutes or resolutions. So again, just making sure we've got all those relevant steps in place. So going back to your deed, read the deed, read the deed, read the deed. You will have heard that very commonly from presenters within the industry, including myself. And this is why this area becomes so important, because the impact of getting it wrong can become quite significant. So let's now move on and understand a little bit more about how we can assist ultimately in this approach to get a deed of rectification obtained. So what we have done is built into our platform now a specific deed of rectification. And you can see a screenshot there. We'll go into it live shortly. So the idea behind this, with the work of our legal partner at Hill Legal, we can now prepare and arrange for the preparation, most importantly, of that deed of rectification document. And what will occur as part of this process is that you will look to provide us with the relevant information based upon your understanding of the situation, and then look to have that break in the chain ultimately fixed. Okay, so it could be that deed of rectification, deed of confirmation, deed of assumption, some other element there. In a lot of instances, if you are not sure, you can submit the information to us, and ultimately Hill Legal will be conducting their own review of the rectification that needs to occur as part of the scoping of the work that needs to be done in any event. Now, there will be instances, rather than saying if there are instances, there will be instances at certain points in time where the impact of the defect is so significant that we will see advice ultimately being provided through Hill Legal that would say that the defect in the chain is ultimately incurable, or the risk based upon the client's circumstances is such that you are better potentially to be basically migrating this fund over to a brand new SMSF. Okay, and that could be because there are blended families, there could be risks in respect to the overall position in the fund. And therefore, rather than trying to remedy through this process, you are going to be better off sort of cutting your losses, moving that over, starting with a fresh deed and then operating at that point in time. Now, recognizing that there may be costs in respect to that process, but that is in essence a discussion that you would be needing to have with Hill Legal as the law firm sort of working through these issues, with you as yourself and the client ultimately around those risks and how to best manage those overall risks. Now, a little bit about the Smarter SMSF and Hill Legal relationship. As I mentioned at the beginning, Hill Legal is our chosen legal partner for Smarter SMSF around the provisions of legal services that happen. So that may be around if you're doing deed upgrades, changes of trustees, binding nominations, etc., where you want that legal sign-off certificate as part of that process, then Hill Legal is the one that would undertake that for you. We also have a number of other services through this process that we utilize Hill Legal for. It can be around stamping. It can even include sort of conveyancing and the like as well, where we're moving assets from bare trusts back to the SMSF upon subsequent repayment of LRBA loans. All these things are available through the Smarter Legal Review process. Now, we've been working collaboratively with Hill Legal. Me and Chris worked on the 2017 reforms and the impact it had on the deed. And we go back, I guess, even further than that. But Hill Legal have been working in the SMSF and estate planning areas for a significant period of time that you can see there. And really, as SMSF specialists in their own right, we utilise and rely heavily on the team at Hill Legal around many of these aspects. So Chris and myself and a number of others, including members, spend a lot of time looking at our SMSF documents. And ultimately, where we have amendments and so forth, these are all signed off through the Hill Legal team and then made available on the Smarter SMSF website. So let's get stuck more specifically into what this process then looks like around a deed of rectification through the Smarter Legal Review service. So as I said, rectification can be done across a range of SMSF documents. Now, it may be in respect to the deed itself. So the fact that we have those typographical errors, missing details, could be incorrect process, as we said, around completing a deed upgrade. We've even seen them when new funds have been established and therefore they're being picked up when the information has gone to the bank. We've also seen examples where we need to put in place some form of deed of ratification, or again, could be rectification, ultimately where the documents have been electronically signed, but from a procedural point of view, the lender, some sort of financial institution, haven't accepted because of a policy decision rather than because of the law, have said, well, we're not going to accept an electronic version. So in that situation, we need to rectify the position by ultimately acknowledging that the documents were signed electronically originally, and for the purposes of obtaining whatever the requirement is under the financial institution, those documents have now been signed in wet ink. So again, that is another common scenario that we've seen in more recent years, obviously with the introduction of the technology neutrality laws. Change of trustees, again, common one around procedural errors. Who needs to be a part of the document process when we are removing and appointing different parties? And the LRBA ones, again, it could be around things like we've got incorrect details in the description around the acquired asset. The bank has requested amendments as well, is a common scenario. And as I mentioned, it could be the fact that we're not looking necessarily at rectification, but we're looking at some type of confirmation or adoption as part of the reviews. So again, we've got missing deeds in certain circumstances, or parts of deeds are missing, or we're missing pension documents. So one of the documents we have on the Smarter SMSF site is a lost pension deed. Equally, we have a lost trust deed. So those things, in addition to the review service that Hill Legal provides, can try and remedy the missing information through the structured process that we have in place around that. So procedurally, what will happen is that ultimately the user will complete a deed of rectification form, okay? And we're going to jump into that in just a moment. But ultimately what we have here is the rectification process in here covers those three key areas that we spoke about before. So it will cover typographical errors, missing information, and process. So in the form, you will have the ability to include all the information, upload documents to assist in that process, and make payment in respect to that rectification, which will submit the order. Now, it is not going to naturally generate an order like it does for our other documents that we have on the platform, but you will get an email confirmation of the order that's been done. And then that information is then going to be passed across to Hill Legal, okay? And what that ultimately means is that we pass that information across to Hill Legal, information about the entry, information about the fund, all the data that you have provided, including the attached documents. You tick a disclaimer in the form that authorizes us to ultimately do that, and that Hill Legal is providing that legal advice. Now, within a short time frame, within a couple of business days, the Hill Legal team will then be undertaking the scope review of what they need to do. So ultimately, what is the issue? Let them have some time to look at the documents and the issue that have been provided. And based upon what they have found, they'll either go, yep, we're happy that it's a simple rectification, the payment's been made in accordance with that simple rectification, or no, we've actually found 2 or 3 or 4, however many other issues. There are issues that we need to make you aware of that you may not have ultimately found yourself. So therefore, as part of this process, Hill Legal will go back to you and say, look, we need to rescope the work that needs to be completed here, and the cost in undertaking that will be X. Now, you will have paid Smarter SMSF already as part of that process. The bill that would be provided to in the end through Hill Legal will naturally recognise the rectification that has occurred. Okay, so if it was $1,000, you've paid your $400 already, therefore there would be a $600 plus GST invoice for the balance, and then we will provide that payment to Hill Legal as part of the overall process. And then ultimately, Hill Legal will go through and prepare and send that deed of rectification to you as the user. Let's jump in and have a look now at the site itself, because there are a couple of little differences here that you can see on the screen that will acknowledge that it is subject to legal review. So the submitted order will ultimately recognize in sort of like a traffic light, but it will go to amber that'll say the document is now in a legal review process, and therefore you will need to wait until Hill Legal has ultimately completed that task before then the completed order on the system, well, before the order will change to completed on the system is what I should say. So the platform will not ultimately, with a rectification, will not generate an order, but you will then mark it as complete. This is different to where a trust deed upgrade may occur and you select legal review. So again, using a similar set of circumstances, the document will move to amber. It won't generate, but once you have obtained that legal sign-off, say for the upgrade or change of trustee, you will then go in and complete that and tick that acknowledgement that will then generate the order for you at a subsequent point in time. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump across to the Smarter SMSF platform, and I'm going to highlight to you how this process works. Okay, so I'm on the new platform here. So these are only available in our new platform. So we are in the next week or so migrating everything across to the new platform. So I'm not going to sort of explain from our previous platform. You'll see the link on the site to be able to get to this. Ultimately, what we're looking for is our deed of rectification. So you can then see this comes up here, and you'll note on the right-hand side, we have some little images or icons that are available. And this is a feature of our new platform that says this document either is subject to Hill Legal undertaking work, either on a compulsory basis or potentially in respect to having it available if you want to utilize the Smarter Legal Review in that ordering process, okay? So in this instance, we've got our deed of rectification. and you can see the description of the information, what it will produce and what the process is ultimately all about. And we have a knowledge base article that talks about the sample that we have on here, which is in respect to an incorrect fund name. And I'll come to that in a short period of time. So all we need to do is click on Order Now, and it's going to open up that particular form for us. Now, I have created a saved order here that I'm going to go through with you, but you can see here what we have in place is ultimately a form that is built in a similar way to many of our other forms, but it is quite unique and specific in the same respect to the rectification that needs to occur. So I'm just going to close that. I'm going to go back to our saved order here for the webinar, and it will just allow us to ultimately resume that order for our Smith SMSF that you can see here. So what we've got in here, and I'm just going to go back to our first page. So what we've got in here is naturally capturing our fund information, our fund name. You can then see in here the type of document that requires rectification. Okay, so it may be that it's an establishing deed that has the error. It may be that it's a deed upgrade, so through variation. It may be a change of trustee. It may be a limited recourse borrowing arrangement. It may be something else. And if it is other, then you would indicate what that is there as part of the process. Now, what you can see in here is you would then be typing or ticking the box around what is the actual error in its own right. And we have tooltips that you can see here that talk about examples of what those certain boxes here that you would be ticking relate to. So what we've got here is, say, a typographical error. The typographical error will enable you to choose what that error is on the basis that you know what that error is. And then you would put the name error, how many parties potentially have that name error, what's the incorrect name, what's the correct name, what's the role of the person that has those errors in that, and go from there, okay? If it's a date, what's the incorrect date, the correct date, incorrect entity or trustee, incorrect address, again. So it's fairly stock standard in terms of that. We've got our missing information. So is it that the deed is undated? What date should it have been signed? The deed is unsigned by one or more parties. How many parties have not signed it? If it's only one, what's the name of that missing party, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have our process error. So in respect to the process, did we have a party that was missing, or did we have a party that was maybe included that shouldn't have been included because that may have been remedied previously in that role? So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to use in this example the fact that we've got a procedural error, because this is one of the most common ones that we see with a lot of older deeds. So we're missing a party, and the party is Smith & Co. Widgets, because they were the original employer sponsor to this deed. And when a change of trustee occurred in, say, August of 2023, they were excluded from that process. So that's me just putting in some free text information to help Hill Legal understand what the issue is that you found. So it just kind of fast tracks them to look for what that issue is, and then they will naturally undertake an additional level of review, just looking at the chain of documents around this fund as well. So you then have the ability to upload documents into here. So in this instance, we would be uploading the establishing deed, any other variations that have occurred historically, the change of trustee deed as well. There is a limit, a file limit for uploads. So you can see there, the max file limit is about 20 meg. If you have multiple documents that is going to be much, much more than that, then you can simply log a ticket and through support at Smarter SMSF, and in the background, we will then attach that file to, or those files, to this record when we send that information through to Hill Legal. So in this instance, then we're recognizing that we've got a missing party. We've put that missing party in here, provided a little bit of detail to help. And then what we're now capturing in here is who are the parties to the actual deed itself. So we've got our fund address, we've got our fund name captured previously. Who are the members of the fund? Well, we've got James and Jennifer Smith that you can see in here. So we've captured that information. And again, we can sort of pull some of that data down from our SMSF software to simplify the process or speed up the process if we want to. We do have a corporate trustee. We recognize that all the trustees are members or directors are members as well. We've got our corporate trustee as Smith Super Proprietary Limited. We've got our registered address for that company. And yes, we do have an additional party. Okay, so we have recognized in that previous change that Smith & Co. widgets should have been a party to that deed upgrade. There was a requirement within, or that change of trustee, there was a requirement for them to be a party for that change to have been effective. Okay, so it may have been individual trustees to a corporate trustee. That's kind of irrelevant to it. But what we've got then is we're capturing all of that information because the employer sponsor has two directors, James, but also his business partner, Frank. So Frank actually needs to sign this document as well as part of the process. Now, the question may be, well, we don't want the employer sponsor anymore. It has no real relevance to the SMSF. Well, that can be removed as part of an upgrade process or a change process or something, or even through this rectification process if we want to. But it's part of scoping the work that would need to happen. And then therefore there would be an appropriate fee charged to undertake that process if you wanted to go down the path of removing that additional party throughout that process. And again, you would make reference to that on that previous page with the notes that you'd like to undertake that process. And then what we have in here is acknowledgements. So the first is simply to acknowledge and engage Hill Legal for that legal review to be completed. Also noting here that the Hill Legal is the one that is preparing that document, and then the legal disclaimer from Smarter SMSF to say that we're providing that information to Hill Legal to help them based upon the legal accuracy and the applicability of the rectification is appropriate there, and that you are enabling Hill Legal to undertake that work, and ultimately they then take on the legal responsibility for the completion of that as well, not Smarter SMSF in that instance. So from there, ultimately, this will allow you to review what has been included in this order. You will get an email of the of this application. So in essence, you'll get the information that is in here sent to you along with the actual confirmation as well. Now, if you are requesting this, regardless of whether you are a Smarter SMSF member or on a pay-as-you-go basis, you will come down to the bottom here and it will show the price of $440, and it will require you to then include the credit card payment at this point in time. Now, it's not showing it for me for the purposes of today, as I've got administrative level access here to do this, but I just wanted to highlight that to you, and it would then simply allow you to place that particular order, okay? From that point then, it's going to go to the completion. And as I said, you will get a number of emails confirming A, that the order has been processed, B, explaining that process, and C, the information that has been provided that is ultimately going to go through to Hill Legal. Now, whilst that is processing, we will then get notified on our end that deed of rectification has been submitted. That will allow us to basically get that sent through to Hill Legal for you. Now, I touched on before the fact that when a document that has Smarter Legal Review requested, whether it's rectification, whether it may be through a deed of variation or otherwise, the purple actions button, I should say, here, which is ordinarily available for you to download the documents and undertake a number of actions, is actually this amber or yellow, orangey one that shows that it is subject to legal review. Now, in this instance, all this is going to do is it's going to enable you to update once the legal review has been completed. It will enable you to update and switch that across ultimately to the fact that legal review has been completed. Now, it will require you to acknowledge that that has actually occurred. And for our deed of rectification in here, that will then update the record to say that that approach has actually been done and the legal acknowledging legal sign-off has been done, and then it will change that orange button there back to purple effectively as part of that process. Now, with the rectification, you can see there's no other actions that are part of this because you've got the documents from Hill Legal. Very different to, say, a deed of variation where you have produced that, Hill Legal's providing the certificate. In that instance, as part of that sign-off, it would revert back to something similar that you can see here. So it will allow you to download the document. It will still require you to acknowledge that the legal review, say for that deed upgrade, has been done, or the change of trustee, because we timestamp that for our own records to say that that work, and you acknowledge that that work has been completed, and you're therefore relying on Hill Legal around the validity of that upgrade or change of trustee or document, whatever's actually been done. So it's a really important step, but it's a step that ensures from a workflow point of view that you've gone through the correct process and channels to get that work done as part of that overall process. But again, just seeing in that instance with a rectification, there's no document that's being generated from here. It's purely a workflow process for you to obtain the rectification that you actually need. So let's move back across to our slides again to keep sort of working through that conversation from today. So as I said, the platform will not generate an order, but the user can mark it as complete, and that amber tab will change across to purple. So you will get, as part of this process, the Smarter SMSF confirmation of the submitted order. So you can see that on here, it will recognize what the fund name is, what the order number is, what the document is that's being rectified. So in this instance, you can see there we've said it's an establishment deed. You will get information about a separate email with details of the submission. And then you will, subsequent to that, get direct confirmation from Hill Legal, confirming submission for legal review and that the fact that it's underway. Okay, so Hill Legal will then come back to you confirming the review, the scope, so the review they've undertaken and the scope of work that needs to be done, and if there's any change in the scope that would need to occur as part of that overall process as well. And ultimately, what you are then going to get is you're going to receive a deed of rectification. Okay, now we have a sample document in our knowledge base just to highlight and show you what this looks like. This is a fairly simple fund that we have here where we had an incorrect name here. So in this instance, we can see the two parties. We can see the addresses of the parties. We can see that there's an establishing deed has an error in the fund's name and is to be corrected. And then ultimately, we have a table at the back that explains what that incorrect detail is and the remedy that has ultimately occurred there. So we were missing the words super fund in that process, and now we've included that as being correct because that's what we also have recognised against the ATO's information. And again, we need to incorporate that historical information as part of the overall process, and all the relevant parties, in this instance, their role as trustee, and then also their role as member were required for the purposes of generating that particular document. So that's just one example of that process around rectification that occurs. So in terms of what our Smarter Legal Review looks like, as I said, our simple rectification falls into what we call our level 3. So it's a review of the deed created where we're looking to fix those simple clerical errors. Okay, so we're dealing with typographical and procedural based stuff, or where there is missing information. It's only where we find additional things that ultimately we're going to be moving up to level 4. Okay, so level 1 and level 2 simply relates to the fact that if you are getting some sort of legal sign-off through, say, a deed upgrade, as I've touched on several times today, but from a rectification point of view, you will ultimately sit in level 3. And then if it's outside the scope of level 3, you'll then move into level 4, and Hill Legal, as I mentioned, will raise that with you as part of the original scoping of that particular work. Now, we do have on our Smarter SMSF website, we've got a full breakdown of what the legal Smarter Legal Service actually looks like. So you can go on to the site at any point in time, find out a little bit more about it, ultimately talking through that rectification that we had there. We've got more information in our Smarter Legal Review Services table that explains that a bit more. And as I said, this is really our how-to, how it works in terms of what I've demonstrated to you today as well, and a number of FAQs that we have there available to support you in that process as well. So that pretty much takes me to the end of today's session for you. So I guess a couple of key takeaways around what this process looks like. So we do and have had now for some time to be able to support our members a fully supported legal review service. Okay, so it assists not only our members, but a range of others who order documents on a pay-as-you-go basis to not only look to rectify defective documents due to those typographical or missing information or procedural error stuff, but also to assist those who want some form of legal sign-off that is attached, or can be attached to a range of those SMSF legal documents. Again, change of trustees, deed updates, binding death benefit nominations, etc., etc. But what we've done that is quite different to others is that we wanted to build something into our platform that enabled you to streamline the approach to access that legal assistance, and doing it in a way that is efficient for you, but efficient for us and Hill Legal to do it, which then can deliver a form of fixed pricing for you. So it's competitive. We know it's competitive when we compare to the marketplace, but this workflow that we've built will enable us to get prompt turnaround times for you as well as part of that overall process. So the feedback that we've had over the last 6 to 8 months that we've had this has been extremely positive. And if you haven't looked to utilize it, or you have a situation where you may need to look at it, either now or in the future, please feel free to give us a call. We'd be happy to do a specific demonstration with you. Otherwise, you can get into our documents platform and look to undertake that deed of rectification for any of your clients that may require it. So that pretty much takes us to the end of today's session. We do have only a couple more events before we wrap up for 2024. If you do have any other questions, please feel free to ask them now. Otherwise, we'll leave it there. We will be uploading this session onto our YouTube channel, where we hold a range of these sort of product demo sessions, along with our Feeling Smarter videos that we do on a weekly basis with Tim and myself, and much, much more. So if you haven't subscribed, I'd recommend that you do, to keep up to date with all that is happening from the Smarter SMSF team. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you once again for being a part of today's session. Have a great rest of the day. Take care, and bye for now.